Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, more specifically the work in progress Nintendo 64 core. And even if it never sees an update, again, I was like calling it the work in progress core because it's always changing. And just recently we talked about the news that the Nintendo 64 regular and turbo core were updated, and I wanted to do a special episode on Hybrid Heaven. Not only does it have some of the best improvements in the turbo core in my opinion, it's also one of the examples of why the Nintendo 64 core is my de facto way to play games moving forward. This game, which is cinematic, strange, and wonderful in all the best ways possible, and definitely feels like it got a little bit overlooked back in the day. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined to want to support the channel, I got a Patreon link down below as well. But right off the top, I love how absolutely cinematic Hybrid Heaven can be. This intro cut sequence obviously done in engine, only Nintendo 64 really had FMV for Resident Evil 2, just looks so good in the core with the clean HDMI out, and you'll see here you even have some pseudo real-time lighting going on. And one of the main reasons I want to talk about this outside of the turbo improvements is just how easy it is to deal with anamorphic widescreen on the Nintendo 64 core, because Hybrid Heaven is one of the few games that actually displays in a true widescreen versus 4:3, and trying to do that on an old school television, you have to have one of the 16:9 CRTs, you have to do it via a scaler and something like your television, but MiSTer FPGA just makes that pretty much hands off. You hit one toggle switch and you're in widescreen 16:9 mode, where in this game's instance more of an anamorphic widescreen getting close to a cinema scope, and that is always fun to see as well. But the best part about the turbo core is this is one of the games that can run in high resolution mode as well, and pretty much any game that uses that high res mode is going to see some sort of frame rate issue when you actually turn it on. Stuff like Castlevania Legacy of Darkness and pretty much any other game using high res is just going to suffer performance wise, because the Nintendo 64 were just punching a little bit above its own weight when it came to its ability to actually process the high res mode. But in the turbo core you just have an overclocked Nintendo 64 that's going to give you more frames per second. Now I'm not saying it's going to hit 60 frames per second, I'm not going to say it is perfect, it is just a marked improvement over what we had. And again, with the anamorphic widescreen here, the presentation is just so intriguing and interesting, and it works so well on the Nintendo 64 core, and that's why FPGA is so important, why this core has been so good. It gives you unlimited options to articulate an image and play a game however you want, whether you're on analog video, whether you're on HDMI, whether you want to play this game in 4:3 or anamorphic widescreen, you have all of these options at your disposal, and all you need to do is usually toggle 1 to 2 different settings in the actual core menu, and that is just something that makes games like this so much more playable in my experience. In the high resolution mode with the clear HDMI out of MiSTer FPGA, you've probably never seen Hybrid Heaven look this good outside of that HDMI modded N64 that I'm sure a few of you do have, and the game is just so intriguing and strange as well, playing like a turn-based RPG as well as an action platformer at the same time. It's basically Metal Gear Solid meets something like a JRPG in the best ways and the strangest ways possible, and I really do feel like getting a better frame rate out of games like this on MiSTer FPGA are going to lead more people to actually play them, because stuff like PlayStation 1, Sega Saturn, and Nintendo 64 have an incredible library, but the hardware is getting antiquated, and a lot of people want to play these games without any barriers to entry. People always talk about enhancements, and getting stuff like this on the turbo core just makes the game feel that much more modern. Now, I'm not trying to say this feels like a new release for 2024 or 2025, depending on when I schedule this video, but it does increase the overall playability. But of course, it's still got that Nintendo 64 look, the Nintendo 64 textures, and definitely a polygon count in the models for what Nintendo 64 could push. But on the turbo core, with the enhancements, with the additional speed, with the ease of use on that anamorphic widescreen, you just get an image and a game that is so much more infinitely playable. And of course, it is Konami, so you know it has a great soundtrack as well. Go ahead and listen for 45 seconds, and I'll come back and tell you more about the game and why the turbo core just absolutely makes this a brand new experience that you should check out if you never have. But enjoy the music because it is definitely good. Such a unique soundtrack, and it sounds great coming out of MiSTer FPGA, and honestly some of the music in here reminds me a little bit around the edges of stuff that John Carpenter would do for some of his films. But not talking about stuff like The Thing, talking about the core, it is just so much fun to be able to constantly go back into the core and talk about new improvements. And with the new stock and N64 turbo cores, you're getting an even better gameplay time, and that is the thing. Hybrid Heaven on high-res mode, it wasn't as bad as stuff like Legacy of Darkness, where it really felt like it would chug hard, or something like Turok 3, where it almost felt unplayable in spots. It wasn't terrible, but it also wasn't great, and now I would definitely put it up there in the great category. And again, as I mentioned earlier, a turn-based RPG, the battles are turn-based. You queue everything up, you select your attacks, and then you go ahead and see what happens, which is probably why most people haven't played this game very far. Take it from me, treat this more like a puzzle than an action platformer. When you get to the combat, you're definitely going to find something you like here. And leave me a comment down below and tell me, have you played Hybrid Heaven recently? Have you played it back in the day? I remember renting this and not being quite sure what to make of it, and then realizing that I actually really did enjoy the title. And that's one of the things, that's the great part about MiSTer FPGA and the core. It's going to let you go back in and re-experience games maybe you haven't played in 20-30 years, or it's going to give you the best version of a game you've never checked out before. And from a preservation standpoint, that is hugely important, because it's not just about making sure people can play Mario 64 and stuff like Perfect Dark and GoldenEye on a core. It's giving people the ability to play games they've never checked out before in the most efficient way possible with the best presentation and frame rate, kind of lowering the barriers to entry, because now, especially if you didn't grow up in this era, maybe you're more used to the 60 frame per second gameplay era, or as close as console manufacturers and developers could get to it by then, because I know if you didn't start on PlayStation 1, Sega Saturn, and N64, you're probably not used to games that would run at like 18 to 22 frames per second. That's just what we grew up on, and back then it didn't feel slow whatsoever. But in a modern era through a modern lens, stuff like an 18 frame per second frame rate definitely feels sluggish. But now again on the turbo core with something like Hybrid Heaven, that basically gets itself almost entirely ironed out. Sure, it's not going to be a perfect frame rate the entirety of the time, but this is going to be the best version of the game you possibly can play, and pretty much that statement is true across the entirety of the N64 library. We have games like Banjo-Tooie running near to a locked 60 frames per second. We have games like Perfect Dark with a patch to improve the frame rate running close to 60 frames per second, and we have stuff like Hybrid Heaven here with its massive open world and all of the different structures running better than we've ever seen it run before. And that is why stuff like MiSTer FPGA is so important to the future of gaming. It really does just make it easy to sit down and enjoy a game, not think about it, and know you're getting the best version possible out of the performance. And that's all that I really do care about. It's something that makes it easier for you to enjoy games, and trust me, if you haven't played Hybrid Heaven, I definitely recommend it. But soundtrack sample time one more time with some battle music here. 30 seconds, I'll be right back to tell you a little bit more about the improvements and why you definitely need to play this game. Awesome music, awesome presentation, and a very unique instance of how you can actually fight in a game. And maybe that is, again, why some people were turned off by Hybrid Heaven back in the day, but I can't recommend it enough. It is just a puzzle to solve in all of the combat, and of course you do still get the open world gameplay that is more of that action platformer, and it's just a title that I think everyone should experience at least once. And now on the N64 Turbo Core, you're just getting a better performant version of the game, and that totally matters, because I see a lot of comments down below saying that people want enhancements in their games, they want to upscale the graphics, they want better frame rates, and obviously they're not going to be doing any upscaling internally on the rendering resolution on MiSTer FPGA. Getting a better frame rate, getting better performance out of the game is definitely crucial, and honestly, when it comes to enhancements, I much prefer the original Nintendo 64 look like you see here. because outside of the fact that we have clear HDMI out of MiSTer FPGA, this really is the exact look you would see back in the day if you just pop the Hybrid Heaven cartridge into your N64 and load it up on your old 4x3 tube TV, and that is always fun. And something I always want to accomplish on the channel is making sure that people are introduced to new games maybe they never checked out before and giving them a go. I'm not going to promise you that Hybrid Heaven is going to be your new favorite game. Maybe you'll think it's decent, maybe you'll think it's not for you, maybe you'll think it's absolutely incredible and you'll want to play it from start to finish. That's the fun part about MiSTer FPGA and cores like the Turbo Core. It allows you to experience games in a different way, and if you haven't played them before, it really gives you the best version to decide whether or not it's for you, because trust me, Hybrid Heaven is not going to be for everyone. But if you like something like Metal Gear Solid plus a JRPG plus some tactical RPG elements in the same game with an action platformer wrapper all keeping it encased, then maybe this is the type of game you want to check out. But as far as the N64 core, especially the Turbo Core, is concerned, it's the best version of the game and the most performant version of the game you're ever going to get a chance to check out, and that is a 10 out of 10 for me. But leave me a comment down below and tell me the next game to test on the Turbo Core and I'll see what I can do. But we're done, I'll see you next time. Bye bye.